Hello and welcome to a discussion on cost functions and cost curves in agricultural production. This is Dr. Jubli Goswami, Assistant Professor from the Department of Economics, Lalit Chandra Bharali College, Guwahati. And I welcome you all to a discussion of a very important topic of agricultural economics on cost functions and cost curves. So, what are the learning outcomes or the key takeaways from this discussion? We will be talking about the cost of production, and various concepts relating to the production cost. Then we will proceed to an understanding of different cost functions of the short run, followed by a discussion of the shapes of these cost functions, the graphical representations, the shapes of the curves of these cost functions, and in the short run as well as in the long run. So, proceeding with our discussion, the decision of a farm, whether in agriculture or in any other line of production, the decision of a farm regarding production of a good depends inter alia on the cost of production of the good. The decision regarding production, one of the key determinants of the production aspect of a good is the cost of production of the good. So accordingly, the concept of cost of production is basic to the understanding of the price theory. And this requires a thorough discussion, a thorough understanding of what is cost, what are the different cost functions, and their significance. So, first of all, let us understand that cost is a function of the output. The cost of production is a function of the output, the quantity produced. We know that in the producer's equilibrium, the output is a function of the inputs. And the producer's equilibrium, it is determined by both the cost functions and the production functions. Now, before we proceed further into the cost functions, let us understand some key terms that we often use in our deliberations of production cost. So the first in this discussion would be a reference to the term private cost and social cost. The concepts of both private cost and social cost are used in the price theory. The firm, in its attempt to attain the goal of profit maximization, is guided entirely by the private cost considerations. In its decision making, it ignores all those costs which it may be imposing on others while carrying out its production program. So, the firm will be emphasizing in its decision making process the concept of private cost and not of social cost. Now, every firm requires various inputs to produce a good. In order to secure a command over these inputs, that means to purchase these inputs, to get a hold on these inputs, the firm has to pay some price for these inputs. In common parlance, the amount of money so paid is known as the cost. So economists, however, they say that in the private cost, we must include not only the expenditure incurred by the producer on purchasing of factors of production from the market, but also the imputed cost of all those services which the producer himself provides. The producer may put in his service, his assets. So the cost in the cost analysis and the price theory, in calculating the cost, these imputed cost must also be included. Now, different from the concept of private cost is the social cost aspect. Now, social cost differs from the private cost on account of the existence of externalities. Externalities in the production program. When a producer produces, he may impose some cost on other parties, which must be actually emphasized in the price theory. But we find that any private producer, he or she do not bring in the concept of social cost in the analysis of production cost. Now, proceeding further, in the discussion of production cost, we come across the terms opportunity cost. Of course, opportunity cost is the cost of the alternative foregone. Against opportunity cost, we have the money cost. The money cost of production of any output is equal to the total monetary sacrifice or the monetary expenditures made to obtain that output. In this concept of money cost, we bring in a discussion of explicit cost and implicit cost. Now, explicit costs arise from transactions between the firm and parties from which the firm would purchase the inputs or services for carrying out the production process. These costs are usually the costs shown in the accounting statements. So, this is what is explicit cost. And implicit costs are the costs associated with the use of the firm's own resources. Now, another term in the discussion of cost is that of real cost. We understand that in the production process, workers may suffer various discomforts when he renders his services for productive purposes. So these discomforts and sacrifices are the real cost of production. But however, the concept of real cost is based on subjectivity and cannot be used for precise measurement of production cost. Now, proceeding with our discussion on cost. Now let us understand the concept of short run and long run in the production process. We understand that in the short run, a producer may have to adjust his output, and for the purpose, he can resort to varying some factors of production. All factors of production cannot be varied in a short period of time. Now, these factors like the permanent management personnels or the buildings or the capital equipments, they cannot be varied in the short run. But to say increase the output, the firm may increase the use of raw materials or engage more of labor. So there are some factors which can be varied, which can be made variable in the short run, and there are some factors of production which cannot be varied in the short run. So the concept of short run and long run variable factors and fixed factors. In the short run, that there can be some factors which can be varied. So the expenses on these factors would be the variable cost. And there are some factors, as we have discussed just now, which cannot be varied in the short run. And the expenses on this is the fixed cost of the firm. So a discussion on production cost includes an analysis of the short run cost of a firm. And the short run cost of a firm is divided into the fixed cost and variable cost. So the total cost in the short run can be divided into the total fixed cost and the total variable cost. So first of all, let us understand what is total fixed cost. The total fixed cost is those expenses which do not vary with the output. It is also called the overhead cost. It does not change with the output, it remains constant, irrespective of increase or decrease in the output. In fact, even if a farm shuts down for some time but remains in business, it still has to incur its fixed cost of production. So, the fixed cost is fixed, the amount is fixed, it does not change. It occurs because of the fixed expenses of the farm in the short run. Some examples we may give in this regard, like the insurance payments, fees, the rental charges. These are expenses, or supposing the minimum administrative costs like the watchman fees. These are expenses that the farm has to bear, irrespective of the amount of output the farm is producing. So this is the concept of fixed cost. Now, if we represent the fixed cost graphically, that is shown in figure 1, the TFC curve is the fixed cost curve. As we can see in the figure, in the x-axis we are taking the output and in the y-axis we are taking the cost of production. As we can see that despite increase in output, despite varying amounts of output, the fixed cost does not change. It is a horizontal straight line parallel to the x-axis, implying that the fixed cost remains fixed. It does not change despite changing amounts of output. Now, coming to the concept of variable cost. The variable costs are those expenses, are those production costs that a farm spends or sacrifices in the production process owing to its variable factors. If the farm is varying its amount of output in the short run, then it is doing so by employing more of its variable factors in combination with the fixed factors, and the expenses owing to these variable factors is the variable cost. As we can see in figure 1, the TVC curve is the total variable cost curve. If we have a close look at the TVC curve, we'll find that the TVC curve is an inverted S-shaped curve, and it is upward sloping, it is increasing. And one more thing we may note, that it is starting from the origin. That means the TVC curve, it starts from the origin, means that when the output is 0, there is no variable cost expenses of the farm. But in the same figure, we may note that irrespective of no production, the TFC is not starting from the origin. There are some fixed minimum expenses, that is called the fixed cost, that the farm spends. But the TVC curve starts from the origin. And initially, the TVC curve is concave downward, inverted S shape. The shape of the TVC, that is, it is upward sloping, it is increasing with increase in the output. It implies that when the output is increased, the variable cost increases. The inverted S shape of the TVC curve is also explained by the operation of the law of variable proportions that we have discussed in our discussion of production function. The law of variable proportion, it says that the production process, it consists of 3 stages of production. In the production process, a factor of production is variable and it is used in combination with some fixed amount of the fixed factors. Then the output, it initially increases at an increasing rate. This is called the stage of increasing returns. And here the TVC curve the marginal cost declines, and therefore we have the concave downward shape of the TVC. Then comes the stage of diminishing returns, wherein we find that in the next stage the TVC curve, it increases, and finally in the low variable proportions, the stage 3 comes, the stage of negative returns, and the TVC curve, it slopes upwards very steeply, implying that the variable cost is rising sharply in the third stage of production. So the TVC curve, the S shape of the TVC curve, is owing to the operation of the low variable proportions. Now in figure 1, if we have a close look, then we find the total cost curve, the TC curve, that is the total cost curve, which is a summation of the TFC curve and the TVC curve. The TFC curve and TVC curve, we add them together, we get the total cost curve, and the total cost curve, it starts from TFC. The difference between the TC and the TVC is, we may note that it is the TFC. The difference between the TC and the TVC is the fixed cost, the total fixed cost. Now proceeding with our discussion, we need to understand the average cost curves. To find out the per unit profit, the firm has to compare the per unit cost of production. The per unit cost of production is nothing but the average cost. And the firm has to compare the per unit cost with per unit price to find out the per unit of profit. Therefore, it is necessary for us to understand the concepts of average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost. Now coming one by one, the average fixed cost, the total fixed cost per unit of output produced. So the formula of average fixed cost is the total fixed cost divided by the total output. Let me again repeat that average fixed cost is nothing but the total fixed cost divided by the total output. That is the total fixed cost per unit of output produced. Now we understand that the total fixed cost is fixed, the amount is fixed. Now as output increases, when we divide the total fixed cost, which is a constant amount, by increasing units of outputs, then the average fixed cost value will go on declining. Consequently, if we look at figure 2, the AFC curve is the average fixed cost curve. We may look at the shape, we will find that it is a downward sloping curve. It is asymptotic to the axis, meaning that it will never touch the axis, but it will go on declining. One important property of this average fixed cost curve is that its shape is called the rectangular hyperbola. Now, an important property of this average fixed cost curve is this, that if we take any point on the average fixed cost and we multiply it by the corresponding output, for every point on the average fixed cost, we'll get the same product. Why it is so? Let me again repeat that if we take any point on the average fixed cost curve and multiply it with the corresponding output, we'll get the same product. The meaning is this, that the product is the total fixed cost, which is constant. The shape of this average fixed cost curve is the rectangular hyperbola. Next, if we look at figure 2, we have the AVC. The AVC is nothing but the average variable cost. So what is average variable cost? It is the total variable cost divided by the total output. So what it signifies is the per unit output total variable cost. What it implies is that the total variable cost per unit of output produced is the average variable cost. Now the average variable cost curve, if we look at figure 2, we'll find that it is a U-shaped curve. The average variable cost curve, it gives us some information in money terms that we obtained from the average product curve of the variable factor in physical terms. With an increase in the amount of variable factor, the efficiency in production increases, resulting in an increase in the average product and the average variable cost that declines initially. The average variable cost curve, as we can see, it initially declines, it reaches a minimum, and thereafter it increases. This is reflected by the AVC curve, that is the average variable cost curve, in figure 2. The average variable cost curve gives us some information in monetary terms that I have said. If the average productivity remains constant, then the average variable cost will also remain constant. If it declines, the average variable cost increases. Thus, we have a U-shaped average variable cost curve. Now, the average cost curve, the average cost is the total cost divided by the total quantity. So, what it means is that it is the average cost is a per unit of output total cost of production. The total cost of production per unit of output is the average cost. Now, the shape of the average cost, as we can see in figure 2, it is declining at first. It reaches a minimum, then it slopes up. But as we can see in figure 2, the average cost curve, it declines, but it reaches a minimum. The minimum point of the average cost curve is beyond the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. Why this is so? Because initially when the average cost declines, both AFC, the average fixed cost, and the average variable cost are declining. Then the average variable cost, it reaches a minimum, but the average fixed cost continues to decline, thus pulling down the average cost curve. But after that, the average variable cost, it starts rising steeply, pulling the average cost curve up. Now, let us go to a study of the marginal cost. So, what is marginal cost? Marginal cost is the change in the cost of production when the output changes. The marginal cost is denoted by the symbol delta C by delta Q. That means the change in cost of production owing to a change in the output produced. Now we know that marginal cost is owing to the variable cost, because fixed cost remains fixed, it does not change. So the marginal cost is owing to the change in the variable cost. The marginal cost curve is also a U-shaped curve. It declines initially and then reaches a minimum and then it increases. It rises upwards. We may note in figure 2 that the marginal cost curve, it cuts the average cost curve and the average variable cost curves at their minimum point. Now let us wind up our discussion with a analysis of the long run average variable cost curve. As we can see in figure, the long run average variable cost curve is an envelope curve. It is formed by joining the minimum points of the short run average cost curves. It is the locus of the minimum points of the short run average cost curves. Now, in the short run, we know that a firm has one factor of production, say capital, fixed. With that fixed factor, it has to operate. But in the long run, all the factors of production becomes variable. There is no fixed factors of production. The firm operates at any point on any of the short run average fixed cost. The long run average cost curve, as we can see, it is a U-shaped curve that touches the points L, M, N. So, supposing we are assuming that there are 3 short run possible sizes of plant of a farm, and the minimum points of this short run plant size are average variable cost plant size is LMN, then our long run average variable cost curve is touching this, is formed by joining these points LMN. thus it envelops the short-run average variable cost curves. So what we have discussed so far is that we have analyzed the concepts of production cost. We have taken into consideration the decisions of a firm regarding the cost of production. So what we have analyzed, what is cost of production. Then in our discussion we have emphasized on the terms private cost, the meaning of private cost, the social cost, and we have also stated that the firm in its price decisions, in its decision making process, it emphasizes on the private cost. We have also emphasized on the meaning of money cost and real cost of production, the meaning of explicit and implicit cost. Then we have also related to what is opportunity cost. Then we have brought in an analysis of the short-run cost functions. We have discussed what is total cost, total fixed cost, total variable cost, the shapes of the total fixed cost curve, total variable cost curve, and total cost curves. Then we have brought in in our discussion the concept of average cost, and we have discussed the relation between average cost, average variable cost, average fixed cost, and of course a discussion on the marginal cost. So thank you so much. Thank you.